Hello, everyone. Welcome to my show, Career Startup Leadership Podcast, a podcast to spotlight world class Asian entrepreneurs, C suite leaders, innovators, and allies who provide candid insights from their personal journey to inspire you. And this is your host, Priyanka Komla, joining you on our 87th episode of Career Startup Leadership Podcast. And a quick reminder to follow us on LinkedIn by following me, Priyanka Komla, and a Career Startup Leadership Podcast page to receive your LinkedIn live notifications. And if you're watching this on YouTube, do give us a subscribe and a like. Without further ado, I'm quite sure you're super excited to learn about my guest for today. And I'm going to unveil my special guest, Shruti Gandhi, who's joining us from San Francisco. Hi, Shruti. Welcome to the show.
To share my journey here for everyone that finds it useful.
Thank you, Shruti. And to our listeners, Shruti is an amazing Asian woman in the venture capital field. I see her as a trailblazer, and I thought she's such a wonderful person with an impressive portfolio of work, and we got to bring her onto the show so we feel inspired to understand the behind-the-scenes aspects of being a venture capitalist. Shruti, super honored to have you on the show, and thank you for coming along.
Thanks again. Excited to dig in.
Awesome. So to our listeners, Shruti Gandhi is an engineer turned founder and investor with 7 exits to companies such as Apple, PayPal, ServiceNow, and the We Company. She's invested in 45 companies at Array Ventures across 2 funds. Prior to Array, she invested for True Ventures and Samsung Next Fund. She's a computer science professor at Columbia University as well, and such an impressive person to get to know. So we have special office hours that Shruti is going to provide to some of our lucky live listeners. So feel free to continue tuning into the episode, and we'll provide a link towards the end of the episode where you get a chance to meet Shruti offline. And to our live listeners, do drop in a quick hello and the country that you're tuning in from so we get a chance to acknowledge you as well. All right, Shruti, I'm going to get started with your journey from Mumbai all the way to New York when you came here for your bachelor's program. Talk to us about it when you look back at the memory lane. How does it feel?
Yeah, I'm just looking back at the time 20 years ago. Excuse me, I just had a cough.
All right, we're going to give Shruti a quick moment.
I was a different person. I remember getting on that airplane and unclear what was going to happen to me in my life. I'd worked so hard. Everyone in India works really hard until, for all the schooling and grades and so forth. But then I had no idea when I came here what was my future going to be like. What was I going to study? I had no clue. I didn't even have admissions in college or anything. I hadn't given my SATs. So it was clearly a blank slate. And so looking back now, yeah, I would have never have thought I would have ended up in this journey here, starting my own fund 20 years later, and running and doing something that maybe 0.1% of people in the world do. So feel super lucky to be able to do that.
That's very impressive. And let's talk about your career journey. From an engineer at IBM to where you are today, where you pivoted into a startup founder to a venture capitalist. How did you handle all these different pivots in life, given that you started with an empty slate when you came to the US?
I think the journey has been pretty much based on what my ethos is, which is I follow challenges and problem solving at the time of my life, wherever I am. So the first problem I had to solve was make money. And that was as straightforward as how do I make money so I can do all the other things I want to do. And that was what led me into engineering. I was dreaming of many other professions, but I said, if I go into this, this was 1999. It was really hot to be an engineer and to actually start a company, and tech was really booming. So I obviously wanted to be in tech at that time. So as an engineer, I started my career again to solve different challenges of I was a backend engineer, then I wanted to be an applications engineer. I wanted to work with data. So I kept taking on more challenges of what is up ahead in the world of tech and generally what I should be really keeping up with. So that was the challenge part. So that I did that engineering role for 10 years, and I worked on many different problems like that, and worked in some amazing groups like IBM, such as yourself, like that. And then the challenge next to that, I always wanted to start a company. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, but the challenge was, what do I do to get there? So dove into that, and wanted to learn all about starting a company. As I did that, I started learning about the world of venture capital, which is very different. So there's two types of entrepreneurs. One is the entrepreneurial journey that I was more aware of in my family, which was not venture backed. And people tend to call it lifestyle business. I don't call it a lifestyle business. It's just a very different kind of business. Um, but then the second category that I work in is venture capital. And I got really curious being in tech, to explore how venture backed businesses work. And so I wanted to reverse engineer that. So that led me into my third journey in life, as you call it, pivot, which was, let's figure out the venture capital journey. So the next time I go start a company, the growth, the velocity, everything you need to run that kind of a business is all intuitive from day one. So as I dove into the venture capital journey, I've now worked at a few funds, and we can go more into that later. But that's how I handled our pivots, if you will, if you want to call it.
When you handle these pivots, Shruti, was there anything that was holding you back? Because every field that you enter in was very new to you, right? And you had no experience when you were trying to reverse engineer venture capitalist, that kind of a business.
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, it was not only new. I Now that I look back, it's the every profession was harder and harder to get into, basically. So people talk about engineering. There's very few engineers in the world, but then very few women engineers in the world. And then on top of that, you go start a company. There's so few female founders out there today. And then you go talk about venture capital. There's such few women in the VC industry, but on top of that, very few women run funds. So it's crazy that every job I take or career I decide to get into, it's not just different, but it's harder and harder. The statistics are just like harder and harder in terms of what the situation is in the market today. So what stopped me? I don't know. I like challenges. I think the way I think about this is I work backwards. So if I feel like I want to go solve some problem, I don't think about what I can or cannot have today to make that happen. I think about the risk appetite I can take today. So to give you a clear example, when I went into venture, when I went into to start my own venture firm about 5 years ago, the calculation was very straightforward. So what do I need today to survive? And what is my runway, my personal runway? And how will I feel if I dedicate a few years giving up this runway, right? It's basically dipping into your savings or whatever right? Like that, because you have to pay your rent, you have to do all the other good stuff. And will I feel comfortable failing in 2 or 3 years? Because I always give myself a deadline. For people like me that like challenges, you have to give a deadline. Otherwise, we just can't keep going and digging and digging without, there's no end to that. So in 2-3 years, if I failure, you have to define what failure would mean to me. Should I have kept going? And will I regret not having any success in 2 to 3 years? So that was basically the calculation on my end. And the biggest thing that based on that I concluded is, will I regret not doing this ever in my life? So having said that, the opportunity cost of not doing it versus doing it is the way to look at it. And yeah, so I I guess long way of answering your question is, yes, you always have to acquire some skills, but isn't that what life is about? Learning something new and staying fresh. And we're all trying to upskill and reskill all the time. So this to me did not feel anything different than just a new challenge that my brain needs to learn how to tackle. And yeah, and so here I am, and we can dive more into how I do all those things. But this is obviously 2 3 years now. I've started 5 years ago, and it's been more than 2 3 years, and I feel like I've achieved my goals so far. So I plan on continuing in this journey for a long time. But it's never easy.
Very true. And the fun fact about this entire journey, the way you've portrayed it is, you love challenges, and I love your attitude and the logical way in which you process things, taking emotions out of the equation. How do you do that? I'm just curious.
You don't. uh, there is there is generally two or three states that humans function in. The state I'm on right now on the podcast is a state that is a green state, which is calm and great, and everything sounds nice because you're asking me great questions.
Thank you.
Um, but oftentimes, humans tend to be in the state of yellow or red, um, which is a fight or flight, and then basically reactive around that, which is a red state. And the thing you have to deal with is when you put yourself into these uncomfortable situations, what do you do? And how can you stay in green, or do you go into yellow or red? And that is what you have to constantly remind yourself, that if you stay, if you cannot get out of yellow and red and go into green, then you're not going to succeed, because you're working from a place of fear and insecurities, um, and things like that. But if you can stay in green, obviously we are all fluctuating. It's not a constant green state. But if you can stay for the most part, especially doing difficult things, and come back to your green resting space, phase, in the day, and you have to do a lot of things to make that happen, right? Like it just doesn't just magically happen. So if you can come back, if you get a rejection, but you can come back to green despite the rejection, after you handle the rejection the way you need to handle that, that is where I feel that you can say you can take on hard things in life, and you're prepared for the next hard thing. So how do I do this? Rejections come to me every day. It's in various forms, while I'm personally fundraising from LPs, or I'm trying to work with certain kind of founders, right? It's never ending. And this is just what people who are trying to grow every day have to face: some sort of rejection, including rejection from themselves, right? Um, and so it's that ability to then say, I'm going to face this. What am I going to do when I am in that situation? And how do I get back to my green state so I can go on to the next and the next problem, right? Is the biggest thing that I have to master. So what that literally means for me is how to not take anything personally. When I am fundraising and someone calls me and tells me, love everything you're doing, but this is not a fit for me, or call me back when you're raising your next fund, or something like that, it's easy for me to go into a deep hole of like, what's going to happen? My life work is not being appreciated right now. These guys don't recognize how awesome I am. And, they'll know later, like when I'm so big, I'm never going to let them in. Those kinds of emotions are natural, but they're useless. Um, Honestly, if you distance yourself from that kind of decision into taking it personally, into saying, well, no, this is one person's judgment, and this is coming from a framework they've used, and that may not be the framework you're pitching them, and in fact, it might be a good thing if this match didn't happen today, because it's, you know, you want to work with people that believe in you and vice versa. So yeah, it's a framework you have to continuously adapt. It's not as easy, but you have to keep using that. And so as a founder, if you're fundraising, if you keep getting rejections, you have to realize what's your runway, and how to not take it personally. If you really believe that you're solving something big and important, and you want to just keep doing this, get the right metrics going. But if the feedback is not related to metrics, but it's something else, don't take it so personally.
I like the way you framed it, not taking it personally, which is a challenge for a lot of us, right? Because we take it too personally every time. And, how do you isolate that layer of emotion? Something that we all can continue to learn from each other. But tell me this, Shruti, as an Asian, as a woman of color, does that factor into the equation being in the venture capital landscape?
Definitely, obviously. I think being a female, being a person of color, I would say there's two ways to look at it. This is a problem and I can't get anywhere, or this is a challenge. And no, speaking of women of color, especially, South Asian women running funds, I don't know that many at our stage. I'm probably the only one running an enterprise fund.
Absolutely, and that's the reason we have you on the show.
Thank you. But that is I mean, I could look at that and say, this is not for me, because there's no role model per se in the industry around this. Or you could say, well, no, isn't that someone's job, and why not my job to create that role model for someone, change the ratio, and as Gandhi says, the best live the life and the message that you want others to kind of, so like life is my life is my message, basically, is like what my motto is, right? So end of the day, that is what the fundamental kind of principles that I use to operate. But yeah, I mean, you're again catching me on a great day, sunny day, where we are talking, and having a very fun conversation. There's obviously lots of ups and lots of downs, and I think being able to handle those downs are the strength, and that a lot of people, the successful people, have, that I try to master every day.
That's awesome, and I'm so glad we caught you on a picture perfect day in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shruti. And I wanted to acknowledge one of our live listeners, Bernard Liang. Hi, Bernard. Welcome to the show. And do drop in a question or a comment for Shruti as well, which will get answered.
Hi, Bernard. I actually know Bernard, so that's great.
Awesome. So, Shruti, talk to us about Array Ventures. How did it happen? And is there a story behind that name that you coined as well? Being a computer science professional.
Yeah, exactly. So you would understand. Yeah, Array is the first data structure I really learned in my computer science class. And I invest in data companies, basically. So Array stores data. And that was, the name was very intuitive for me. So Array Ventures invest first check into data-driven companies, enterprise companies that take advantage of data to solve big problems in various industries like fintech, healthcare, things like that. So that was a name that kind of just struck the chord the right way for me. And the logo you see on my website is also created by me. I have no design creative background, so that was just a fun, passion project. As you start something new, those are some of the fun things that can make you happy, while there are other hard things you're tackling at that time.
That's very true. So talk to us about Array Venture. How do you go about when you look at a founder or a startup who comes to you? What are 3 traits that you look for in them? And I want to get like the candid behind the scenes thinking that goes behind Shruti's mind whenever somebody's coming and pitching you and asking for funds.
Funny thing is, there's a lot. There are more technical things. We invest in technical founders. So that's either black and white, right? Like either you have the technical skills or you don't. So that's definitely one thing. The second thing we look for is your knowledge of the industry that you're solving the problem in. Because we invest in B2B companies, I like investing in founders that have experience in that space, at least a tangential space, right? Like if your entire experience has been in fintech and you come and want to solve something in healthcare, there's a mismatch there. So that's the second thing we look for. The third thing we look for, and that's actually it's a big bucket, is sales acumen, we call it. But what I mean by that is ability to understand how to sell to customer. It's biggest thing, right? You don't have to have a sales job in the past, but you have to show that you're excited about closing customers. Second, the sales acumen also lends into closing new hires. So attracting really amazing talent in your company takes a lot of work. So that's a second piece. And third, fundraising, selling to investors. First, that's without that, you don't have a business unless you're starting a non-venture backed business, which is okay. But having investors and doing that again and again, because that's your primary job. If you are on the venture track, you have to raise seed, pre-seed, seed, series A, B, whatever, until IPO. So you have to keep raising money. And if you don't have that sales acumen to raise more money, and you can't convince investor to back you, doesn't help. If you're like one of the best engineers from the top universities, it does not matter. So those three things combined for us are the third thing into sales acumen. So I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. Now tell us this, what are you doing personally to shift the needle so you can focus more on underrepresented startup founders or women or people of color especially?
Honestly, that's one of the biggest challenges in our industry. As I said, female founders the numbers are pretty, bad. And last year, they said that in the pandemic year in 2020, the numbers went down even further. How is that possible? So the thing we have done so far that's well is over a third of our women founders are women in our portfolio, with over 45 companies, which is remarkably amazing for for a fund to generally have those kind of statistics, especially in the enterprise world. But we don't want to stop there. So we are looking for women founders that are solving problems in B2B data space. So please contact me if you are doing that. And then the underrepresented founders, we actually started an initiative around that, where we thoughtfully want to go out and back Black Latinx founders. So please, if you are a founder, again, that is solving amazing problems in big data, AI, machine learning, B2B, and starting a B2B company, we write first checks into the company. So you haven't raised that much money before our round. And that is when you should contact me. Or if you're thinking of starting a company and you don't know how to go about doing that in the enterprise space, that's another way to connect with us, especially through our office hours, which Priyanka, you're going to share down the road and later in the podcast. So so I think that we have another statistics we track as well, which is immigrant founders. And over 60% or more of our founders are immigrant founders. So I think that, everyone in the industry has to be diligent about these kinds of numbers. And we have to be more mindful as I said, someone like me is given the power to be here, so I can change the equation. So I don't have the same biases and the same patterns that some other investor that doesn't look like me have. And so we need more diversity at the GP level as well. So that's where I'll stop, but definitely reach out to us because we definitely care about that.
That's such great news to hear for a lot of underrepresented immigrant and women founders. So I'm so glad you're championing a lot of us and creating a huge impact on the society. So thank you, Shruti, for doing that for us. Now, can you talk to us about a few of your latest investments through your funds?
Yeah, we have a company we recently invested in called Capsule, and they help companies create short form videos. So today, short form videos actually create a higher conversion than photos. It takes 5 photos for someone to convert a user, but 85% of the users convert with just one video impression. So big companies are beginning to realize that that is a need. So that's why we invested in this company called Capsule. Capsule.video is the link. Um, and definitely check them out. Another one of our companies that we recently invested in is called Intentomatic, and that company actually helps you gives you like an SDR dashboard. So if you're in the B2B world, you'd know, that there is a big need for SDRs to help you create quality leads and then help you convert them. And SDR is a growing category of people that companies leverage on.
And
But
what does SDR stand for to some of our listeners?
sales development representative. So, basically that is a growing important job. And, if you're trying to get into tech, by the way, today, for any of you with non-tech backgrounds, I would explore SDR roles just to get a sense of the need in a business and how sales actually ends up happening. So there's a lot of training, just like there's training to become engineers, there's actually sales training programs as well. And so I would definitely explore that and enroll in some of those just to kind of get, because this is one of those jobs that can really help you accelerate your tech career, entering your tech career well, unless you can go the engineering route.
That's very true.
So that's we can talk more about some of our other investments. We have a investment in a company called Blumera, and that's a security company that around automated threat detection and response space. So that's another one that I'm pretty excited about. But look, having a portfolio company is like having children. You can't pick favorites. But so these are some of our most recent ones that we've invested in.
That's very amazing. We do have a question from Bernard, and let me just read it out to you. Under what circumstances might it make sense to pivot back to being a founder or operator while currently investing full time, given one has enough interest in doing so? Because it seems harder to give up your own fund with ongoing responsibilities and commitments.
That's a great question. I think there is like a calling oftentimes to being a founder. You either want to do it or you don't. If you want people, if you have raised money to invest for as a fund manager, you have an obligation to see through your investments, and it's your fiduciary responsibility to make sure the companies, are doing, at least you're there for them to help them succeed. So it's really hard to always flip back and forth. In this current market, there's a lot of that happening today where people are doing almost like multiple jobs as a founder, as an investor. And the case being made is the founders see good deal flow, so they end up investing. But there is the expectation of a smaller check investor is not that high as it is from someone who's basically leading deals and things like that. So I would say that if you plan to go back into the operating world, I would make sure that there are enough other smart people around the table helping those founders, that if they reach out to you and you happen to not be available, then that's not the case, basically.
Well, thanks for that question, Bernard, as well. So, Shruti, talk to us about exits. When do you decide it's time to exit out of your investments?
I don't decide that. Founders decide that. Exits usually happen under big three scenarios, basically. There were used to be two, and now there's a third category that's coming up. So first is IPO. Generally, it takes about 12 years or so for a company, enterprise company, to go public through the IPO route, which is, so for example, if you think of like Uber, Pinterest, etc., they were all born around this last recession of 2009-ish timeframe, and they happened to go public around last year. So it takes that long. It takes at least 12 years. Some companies go public sooner. Square went public in 6 years. That's unusual. But so that's generally the time frame you're looking for. So that's one exit route. The second category is acquisition. So now acquisitions, the idea is acquisitions happen because you can't go public, maybe. So that's one big thinking around acquisitions. Oftentimes there's, acquisitions that happen on the way. So some that happen very early on is probably for like just acqui-hires, which is talent acquisition, IP acquisition, something like that. It's not a big return on that. And then some people get fortunate because they choose to go that route, which is like, I think like a good example is a company called App Dynamics, which was going to go public, and then the day it was going to go public was acquired for about 4 billion or so. So I think that's another route, but that is the company and their preference at the time. But again, IPO, acquisition, and then the third is like a more popular thing that's coming up called SPACs. And those are growing, and we don't know what that really means for the early investors yet. But that definitely is, I would say, a third route that is up and coming for people to explore as well. And so that's like, instead of going IPO or public today, or getting acquired today, you go the SPAC route. So that's the three categories. But what do I decide that, or do founders? It's founders. My job is to help the founders think through the phases and stages and help them fundraise. But end of the day, the company is run by the founders, and they are the C-suite. And I'm not investing in founders that are looking for that much guidance from me on all these fronts. They have a dream, they have a vision, and they want to execute on that vision. So I'm funding them to enable that vision because I'm aligned with that vision. I want to have a world down the road where their dreams come true, and I want to live in the world that whatever problem they're solving for exists. So now, if they decide to get acquired early on, which some of our companies have, it's a math, it's a calculation you have to do at the time as a founder to see why they're doing it, and and should they keep going otherwise. So again, I just provide the data points and what if they're missing something, but it's their responsibility or their passion that kind of keeps them driving.
Have there been any instances where you didn't want them to exit, but they did, and it didn't turn out the way they expected it? Things like that?
That is always the case. I mean, sorry, I shouldn't say that's always the case. What I mean by that is you're all looking at different data. And there's sometimes data that you don't have, which is the founder's personal situation. So oftentimes it's unclear, and you're unable to tell the founders what to do because of their personal situation. It could be financial need, because running a company is not, it's really grueling, and oftentimes no pay for years, right? So like very little pay for years. So it could be financially motivating to sell. It could be, life changes, could be many other things. End of the day, I believe in this philosophy that founders have to run their business. I cannot go run their business. So if I'm not able to run their business, I can't tell them what to do other than just tell them how I feel about it, or at least show them, you know, the future that they're not seeing maybe. Oftentimes when you're in your bubble, you lose track of what's happening in the market. That's an investor's job, to show them just some things happening in the market that that they may find appealing or not, right? So I'm a data point for them as well, that they have to incorporate into their decision making.
Very true. And to our live listeners, I know a handful of them have continued to tune in. Do drop in a quick hello and the country that you're tuning in from. And you always have the option to drop in any kind of question or comment, because this is an Ask Me Anything session with our venture capitalist, trailblazer woman, Shruti Gandhi. So Shruti, tell me this. What is one accomplishment that you're very proud of in your journey when you look back at the last 20 years?
That's a hard question. What is the one thing? Actually, there's two, if it's okay.
Go for it.
When I came to the US, I was telling you all that I did not know what college I was going to even get into. I didn't even have SAT scores, and my parents were like, figure it out. And I basically got myself admitted into college and graduated in like 2.5 years or so. But then a few years down the road now, I ended up teaching a couple of years ago at an Ivy League school. So I felt like a big accomplishment, from not even knowing that even like a local university would accept me, to teaching at one of the top universities, Columbia. So I teach in their comp sci department sometimes.
And you went for your master's at Columbia as well, right?
Exactly. So that was great as
that's
well.
Like a huge accomplishment, being a professor at the same school where you were a student.
Yeah, especially knowing that I didn't even know if Columbia at that time would accept me or not. So that was one. And then the other one is most recently, in the same academic realm, I'm now chosen to be a young distinguished alumni. I received that award from my business school, U Chicago, this year, which is not announced yet. Thank you. But end of the day, these universities, some of the top, Booth is one of the top business schools in the world. And, having, again, back to the 20 years ago, when I didn't even know if I would get into like an undergrad school, local community college, to having these two top universities kind of recognize my initiatives and so forth, it feels like an accomplishment. It feels fake to have to like seek those kinds of validations, but at the same time, it is something I'm proud of, because I worked really hard to get to this point, and it seems like in some ways, universe and these kinds of places are recognizing all the hard work I'm putting together today. So those are the two I feel like I can at least brag to my parents about.
Hey, that's amazing, and I'm so glad you told us all these, milestone accomplishments, and the one that's coming up with the young distinguished alumni. Well deserved, I should say, Shruti. Congratulations again on that.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So let me ask you this as well. You've seen several successes in life, be it with your education, your career, your investment funds. But how do you handle low moments in your life? I know you don't take it too personally, but what's the thought process like when you see a situation that's totally out of control?
So, okay, I shouldn't say I don't take everything it's not an overnight thing. But there's a book that in some of my low moments I read. It's called The Four Agreements. And that book is a really good framework for me to, one of the things that has come out of there is don't take things personally, don't assume things, from people. But those are some of the ways I read, I talk to people, I talk to other people that I feel like I respect at the time. I don't, even if my tendency might be to just, go into a cocoon and not really share this with others, I try to actually be more open-minded and share and more transparent with other people. Because here's the thing, what you're going through is not that unusual with many other people, maybe they don't have the exact same problems in life as you do, but they have some other similar problems. And if you can learn from them, you can avoid spending years on that failure. So I think talking to a lot of people really helps. Um, and then I would say that I try to transfer that energy into something positive. If I feel like I received a rejection from someone, I take that rejection and fuel it into five other people I should reach out to, and open and try to open more doors for myself. And you know, fueling that and tunneling that energy into something else is valuable than just sitting and moping about something. Um, because what's moping going to get me, right? Like, I'm going to feel sorry for myself, and I'm going to just go try to find other excuses to validate myself in that state. But because I want to get into the green state again, what else do I need to do to get into that green state from the current red or yellow state I'm in? So yeah, I think that's how I think about some of handling some of the situations when I'm in my low moments.
I like the way where you color code the signals. So you're actually labeling your emotions, right? I'm a big fan of the book Four Agreements as well, and Susan David, who's an emotional psychologist, who talks a lot about how do you sit with your emotions, label them, and then get back to work. So you acknowledge them, and then you look at what's the action steps. So thanks for sharing the framework, which is something that our listeners love to learn from our guests as well. One important aspect of your career, when I look at it, is mentorship. I know there are, it's opened up several doors for you when you were at IBM as a software engineer, all the way as a venture capitalist. How important would you rate mentorship in your career, and what are you doing to mentor others around you to bring them to where you are today?
Actually, mentorship is a funny word. I don't think I've had two mentors in my IBM days, but I look at them as more skill mentors versus life mentors per se, right? It's a funny word because it almost requires a lot of commitment on two people's parts. But the way I look at mentorship is around problem solving. I have a problem today, and it could be as a new fund manager, even though you're in venture, there are so many other questions you may have, and you end up in situations that are so unusual. Oftentimes, someone who's experienced, has seen that many other times. So the way I think about mentorship is, who can I call for that problem solving at that time, and building that kind of a relationship. I'm not looking at, because I don't know I'm going to encounter this problem. I'm not looking for a quarterly meeting or something like that, or any kind of regularity from any of these other people that I would consider a mentor. But I think for me, it's that around this problem that I need to get solved, and who should I call, and then that person automatically becomes a mentor for that bubbled problem at that time. So I think if I were to take a step back, my belief is smart people know how to define problems, because most of our lives we're handed problems. You grow up and there's an algebra problem. You grow right, like you grow up and you have a proper defined college entry problem. Things are mostly defined for the first 20-25 years of our lives. I mean, at least in terms of the tracks you want to take. But the problem starts where the interesting things happen once you start defining that problem set of, like, okay, well, I want to be in this degree. Well, why? And then in defining that into what do I want to do next? Why do I want to pick this career? And kind of like defining your problems in different ways, that can then lead to you making outbound call for help from someone, or reading up on things, reading up on papers, blogs, whatever it is, right? Like, or trying to find um, folks in the industry for whatever problems you have. So that's how I think about mentorship. There's so many people that have helped me along the journey, and I think there's a Twitter thread I wrote about that as well. And you're welcome to refer to that thread as well, that Priyanka, you can maybe add to that. But in that, I've referred to so many people that have helped me throughout the journey. But I think it's not because they were sitting there saying, Shruti, whatever you need, I'm here. I don't think, in fact, anyone's really ever kind of said in that fashion. But what I have had is people saying, she called me and I'm going to take that call, and if I define the problem the right way, they're going to help me answer that problem the right way. And I think that the problem definition becomes so important to bring to any mentor. And it could be a more technical problem, as I mentioned, about like, how do you do this for your fund, or what's your back office man. It could be any specific thing, or it could be as big as, I was thinking about my journey in venture, and how about me starting a fund, and here's my reasoning around it, and here's my reasoning as to why I shouldn't do it, right? So I think it's like definition of that in clarity in your own thinking that will help you get as much as help as you want from people you want to get mentorship from. And so I think if I may extract it a little bit further out, there are often people reaching out to me for help over email and any other medium. And their first thing is, can I get on a call with you for 15 minutes? And I think that doesn't lead to anything productive for anyone. You have to remember, important people have very busy schedules, and everyone wants to really help you. But if you can just define the problem and do the critical thinking up front a little bit, to say, here's what I want help with, and here's what I'm going to pose to this person that I'm reaching out to something, I think the world will come together and band together to help you with that specific thing. So that's what I would just encourage people to do a little bit more of, which is define the problem a little bit more to get help from people you need, that you want help from when you reach out to them.
That's a great way of looking at mentoring, and this is the first time I've heard a different definition in terms of defining your problem clearly, having that clarity of thought, and then the universe opens up to help you find the right person who can help you think it through. So thank you for sharing that. And I think your office hours are a great way for a lot of our listeners, if they are startup founders or looking at being part of the venture capital field. I would highly encourage all our listeners to go ahead and touch base with Shruti once we post that episode link. So Shruti, let me ask you this. At age 17, when you came to the US as an immigrant trying to carve your future, and now here you are as a young, distinguished alum and an amazing woman in the field of venture capital, what is one advice you would give to your younger self when you look back?
What's the one advice I would give? Don't be afraid. Give it a shot. I would say that mantra keeps me going every day.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think just what's the worst thing that can happen, right? People say no, and how to take that no in. And I think we talked about that, how I try to process the no's anyway. But yeah, don't stop. Keep going. Keep believing in yourself. Just do it. All the amazing slogans from all the top brands, I believe in them.
Yeah, that's very true. I'm quite sure they've tried and tested the logic and the narrative behind all these different slogans. So we have a fun rapid fire round for you. Are you ready for it?
Yeah, I'm excited.
So you tell me the first thing that comes to your mind when I say the following, and in one word. How do you define success? I think we're not hearing you well, Shruti. Yeah, I think we lost you again. If you want to put back your Bluetooth headphones. Let's see if we can connect back. Hi, Shruti, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Awesome. Yes, we can. So a quick, fun, rapid fire round. How do you define success?
Success is if the day I'm living today is better than the day before.
What does happiness mean to you?
Unachievable.
What's one fun thing about Shruti that's exclusive to our listeners?
Oh, that's fun. If you have a fun recipe that I should try out, please send it my way. In my free time, I'm cooking and creating fun recipes, trying to replicate things I eat outside at restaurants.
Pretty cool. I'll see if I can send you one.
Yeah.
What is your native language and one word to describe yourself in it?
Huh. My native language is Gujarati. It's a region in India. Um, and what's the one word that I can describe in that language? I'm not sure. That's a good one to
Maybe
think about.
maybe in English? Do you have a word that you would describe yourself in?
I don't know if it's a description more than there's a word in Jewish called chutzpah, um, and it's oftentimes in English. It sometimes is also the X factor, or like people just what the superpower. I think that that's the generally that's how I feel like I have something that I spark a lot of energy and positivity in people, and I think that helps me as well do better every day.
Well, you rightly said that. That brings us to the end of this episode, Shruti. You've been such an amazing guest, and I've learned a lot in terms of my takeaways in this episode is, the way in which you process your emotions and the logic, having that clarity of thought, that's very critical. So that's my first takeaway. And the second takeaway is having this revolving set of mentors who can help you think through things where you might not be able to do frequent catch-ups, but you know when to reach out to them. Do you have any parting thoughts to our listeners before we wrap up?
Thank you so much for having me here. Definitely, I think you've asked some really amazing questions here that, I often feel like people just stay true to the fund and the narrative. But here as you said, you've talked more about the emotions around the journey that I've taken. And I think that is really valuable to be able to uncover that from a guest. So thank you for making that happen. And definitely, everyone, listen. I'm excited to listen to some of your other speakers and see what they have to say. But follow me as well on Twitter. I'm at Shruti, and also follow me on LinkedIn and Array Ventures on LinkedIn as well to learn more about our investments, or if you have any questions around startups. We also have a Substack newsletter that is Shruti Gandhi at Substack, .substack.com basically. So thanks for having me, and thanks for asking such amazing questions.
Thank you so much, Shruti. So that was Shruti Gandhi on our 87th episode of Career Startup Leadership Podcast, a podcast to spotlight world-class Asian leaders, entrepreneurs, innovators who provide candid insights from their personal journey to inspire you. So do follow Shruti on Twitter and LinkedIn, and Array Ventures as well, to continue to stay inspired on what's happening in the field of venture capital, AI, and big data. And continue subscribing to us by following me, Priyanka Komla, and a Career Startup Leadership Podcast page on LinkedIn to receive your LinkedIn Live notifications. And if you're watching this on YouTube, do give us a like and a subscribe. For our podcast platform listeners, do give us a like and subscribe so we know how this episode has helped you become a better version of yourself. Until our next episode, which is going to happen next Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern, this is your host, Priyanka Kumla, signing off. And thank you so much, Shruti, for your wonderful wisdom and for for helping us understand the field of venture capital in such an authentic and candid way. We really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for having me again. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.